Greg and Leslie will be kind of your primary points for this, and many of you all are very aware of that and familiar with us. Greg is a new addition to our team and will be taking an ever increasing role in administering this. Claudette Tracy, another woman on our team who you guys are probably very familiar working with on your contracts and getting those signed. She's not here today, but she's still very much involved. So if you ever have questions, concerns, you guys know who to contact. You've got our contacts. And so, yeah, excited to keep on working with you guys. We will shift now to just a really, really brief overview of kind of what set the impetus for this meeting. Let's get it as I resize my windows here. So move my stuff. There we go. So we'll move into looking at the statutory changes. Legislation was passed in the 2024 regular session that made some changes to KRS 138.510. So you guys are probably all very familiar with this statute. This is the statute that oversees the Equine Trust Program. If we go down here to subsection 5. There we go. This is the section that particularly pertains to us. And you'll see in there the addition of Bluegrass Community Technical College as one of the eligible equine programs at the state universities and BCTC that can receive funds from this trust and revolving fund. BCTC is included throughout. I did also, and this is in your materials, include the actual piece of legislation, which shows you in a little bit more clear writing the addition of Bluegrass Community Technical College here as well throughout. That really was the only substantive change to this section. And so while it's only a few words being added, and we're excited to have a new equine program to be a part of this, you guys are very aware of how the distributions have been calculated in the past and how this is going to ripple forward into how we determine what do we do with our funds for not only FY25, but also for FY26, knowing that, again, we'll have future meetings where we can address bienniums out of that period. So at that point, Leslie, do you have the cash report? And we will move on to that.
I do. Let me see if I can share it.
In the context here, I know I tried to prepare you guys with this and send this out early. I wanted you guys to look at this because obviously we've had a practice, it's even embedded in our guidelines to this point of really taking a pretty conservative approach to dispersing the revenues here. We've had a priority of looking at those historical trends, making sure we do have a healthy carry forward balance for instances like this when a new entity joins or what have you. So that kind of historical analysis we wanted to equip you with so that we can use that in informing kind of how we want to move forward with distributions.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So as Ryan indicated, let's take a step in the past because it's been a while since we've met. So if you can see from this spreadsheet, and every once in a while we have sent this around, but this spreadsheet predates me. One day I'll make it more beautiful, but it predates me and it works. So that's what I'm going with. You can see the receipts that we received through the years. Back in 2014, we had a high of like 628,800, but more recently in the past few years, the receipts have dipped and they've been coming in more around the $470,000 mark. Going into 2025, let me talk about 24 real quick. In the past, we have shared a spreadsheet with you that shows you monthly receipts. A lot of you like to gauge that. However, in 24, the Department of Revenue put some revenue into our account that was not ours and then had to transfer it out. So it made it a little bit hard to predict month to month where the receipts were. But you can see here where we had money coming in. And then in March, we had a huge transfer from the Department of Revenue, which left us with in FY24, $478,000 coming in. Prior to that, we did have a carry forward from FY23 of $402,000. With the expenditures, we ended up going into FY25, our current fiscal year, of $401,000. So let's move forward to FY25 and where we've been so far. You can see that the cash receipts, you can see our carry forward here, the 401,000. Cash receipts coming in steadily. However, the Department of Revenue made a mistake this year. They did deposit funds into the Equine Trust Fund that was not the Equine Trust Fund's funds. In December, they transferred that money out. We are still working with the Department of Revenue to make sure that that money has been transferred out, because if it all has been transferred out, you will see that we currently have a deposit of 529 in that account, which is higher than the last 2 fiscal years. So that leads us to think there may be more to be transferred out. But we do anticipate around the $470,000 mark. That's where we're going with. The expenditures going out are contracts for FY25 and FY26, because we do issue those on the biennium, or $120,000 each, with the University of Louisville waiving their contract. So currently in the account, you can see right now, our balance is $751. So let's talk about the future a little bit. So as I mentioned before, the University of Louisville they did waive their contract for the FY25 and 26 years. BCTC needs to come on board, and one of the decisions that is being asked today is what to do with BCTC, and are we funding everyone at the same $120,000 level? So making assumptions here, knowing that we have not decided yet, in FY25, with our balance forward, if our receipts come in around the $476,000 mark as we predict, and we add BCTC at the $120,000 a year funding level, we're looking at a balance at the end of FY25 of $277,000 in our carry forward. Going into FY26, because we did these contracts on the biennium, assuming that $277,000 carry forward, assuming $476,000 of receipts come in, assuming the University of Louisville, which they already have waived it, I do not see them coming back and asking for a 26 contract, but assuming they do not ask for the contract and we fund BCTC at the $120,000 level in FY26, we're looking at $153,000 carry forward at the end of 26. The reason this is important is to show that going into 27 and 28 in the subsequent fiscal years, we may have to reassess the funding levels of these contracts, but we do have enough funding in the fund currently to keep up with $120,000 per institution funding level. I know I flew through that. I know it's boring numbers, but are there any questions?
We'll get into this more, so let you guys kind of chew on this, get your thoughts together. We'll go through the guidelines. And again, these are embedded in our guidelines, which are up for modification here today. And so we will get to that section and you can make your recommendations. We can have your suggestions, kind of take a vote essentially on that and figure out how we want to move forward. A little
Before we go
context.
on, Greg, do you have anything else to add on that? Because although Greg is new to doing this for CPE, Greg is an old hat with state government, so he is well versed in this. Do you have anything to add? And we're currently transitioning Greg into keeping up with the accounting side of this account.
No, I don't think so, Leslie. I think you covered everything.
Okay.
Some additional context, again, for you guys to chew on while we get into the guidelines, we kind of transition, is there are some issues, right? So if we do want to change the contracts, change that $120,000 for this current, we would have to renegotiate contracts, right? And obviously you guys have already submitted budgets. Many of you, some of you on a fiscal year basis, many of you for the full biennium even as well. And so we know that would have an impact on the existing institutions, on your all's plans for how that you intended to use this funds. But it is also explicitly lined in our contract. So that would also, if that is changed, it would also require a change to the contracts, re-signing through that and getting those things fully executed again. And then beyond that as well, Greg and Leslie can speak to this. We love having a cautious carry forward for moments like this in our funds, but there's something that just working in state government, you guys know, working at your institutions, you probably know, carrying forward some money is also potentially dangerous. because it can get swept in any moment. And you can just be reliant on those, again, recurring receipts. And so we want to keep that in mind kind of as we go into some further discussions. But that is not the only kind of potential change to the guidelines. It's one of many, but we want to provide you guys that information before we get into the real meat of this meeting, which is reviewing and changing our guidelines. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. And there's not a lot of order to this meeting in the sense of speak up. If you have thoughts, speak up if you have concerns, questions. Are you guys all seeing the guidelines here? Yeah, get a nod.
No, we just see the ocean.
Oh man, okay. I clicked the wrong screen. There we go. See if I can do it. Let me know if it's showing up.
Yes, we see it.
See the guidelines?
Yes.
Good. Okay, awesome. So you guys saw this, sent this out to you guys beforehand for your review. Also, for you guys to suggest any changes. I didn't receive any marked up or any emails from you guys concerning these. But everything that has been marked up at this point in these is from CPE staff. These are kind of our suggested changes in here. Obviously, the meeting here is to discuss these things further, get your all's input as well. And a lot of this is we realized we probably need to be a little bit more clear here in some of the award criteria. How do we evaluate budgets? How do we evaluate projects? Kind of what's our expectation there? And so a lot of the changes we'll end up getting into are also to maintain consistency with some other CPE programs, particularly ones that are capital related, like this one is. So I won't go through everything in great detail here. You guys are familiar with the statute, just kind of the introduction here. This is our first major point. And so this highlighted purple section here. So part of what we are commissioned or designated as the administrative agent required to do is beyond just establishing this committee, we are also required to evaluate proposals and make recommendations for the awarding of funds, like you guys are, the advisory committee. And we realize we've very much looked at these budgets and have kind of vetted those, but haven't always gotten a lot of input from everybody else in terms of what should be funded, what shouldn't be funded across the institutions. So our question first to you all, we did not make any changes because we thought this was really something we want to solicit your input, is that do you guys want to go and put some more formal language, a more process around what does it look like for us to evaluate proposals for the use of these funds, and for you guys to make recommendations to us?
So, Ryan, I'm thinking that language refers back to a time when, the proposal is more, do we want to have a massive funds that one institution or two institutions maybe competes for out of the whole thing rather than splitting it up equally. But how I understood you to say was like, once you determine that everyone's getting $120,000 or whatever, you're saying you want this committee to evaluate what we submit for our budgets for those.
So, I mean, I think that's part of the question. So you do have a great historical knowledge of this, and it is very vague language. So knowing that this may have been from a different time where funding was allocated in a different way. And so proposals may be coming from a more competitive process, right? So if you have 500,000, well, it may go 100,000 to each 5 universities at the time, or 250, right, to 2. The question we're kind of looking at is honestly trying to make, I mean, we can even just remove this language out of here if it's no longer pertinent. And if we want to just keep on doing the kind of equal distribution method. But the way we looked at this language, that could be evaluated a number of different ways. Because
let me stop you right there, because I need to announce that the live stream has gone down due to technical issues. They're trying to resolve it. We're still recording, so it'll be posted after the fact.
Okay.
That's my public service announcement.
Yeah. I love it. Publicly noticed meetings, public meetings, we got to do stuff like that. So appreciate that. So this is a question for the group, right? Is this language that's necessary anymore, given particularly like things like the context like Leslie mentioned, or is it something that maybe we want to keep in, but put more specificity around how it applies?
I think it's worth revisiting whether or not we feel, especially if receipts maybe continue to go down over time, for us to revisit whether the equal split with U of L, waiving their contract is the best use of these funds from this group, or if we do want to go back to a time to say, and one of our institutions has a very clearly identified need that would require a larger portion of the funds, and we all agree to do that, because then our individual institutional amounts maybe not as much. And then we all think about how we would prioritize different projects, different institutions, going into the future. I think it's worth us revisiting that from time to time.
What's the thought of everyone else here? I see Amy came off.
Yeah, so let me just kind of give you my background understanding and I guess kind of where my questions lie. So I have some institutional knowledge about what's been happening here, but limited experience in the leadership role. So my understanding and kind of piggybacking off of what Leslie was saying was that, at one point in time, this was more of a pool of money where a proposal would be made for an amount that wasn't necessarily set. And then it was kind of, agreed upon as to whether that amount was appropriate or the project was approved, so on and so forth. So I guess I'm a little bit confused as to the language, because I think some of the language, at least how I interpret it, still alludes to that process. And so then, and that's one of the reasons why in the past, we've waived these funds, and to kind of fill everybody in on our thought process of that, because it makes, I'm sure to a lot of people, it doesn't make any sense to turn money down. But our understanding of this money needing to go to capital projects, physical assets, we don't have farm facilities. And so, because we're operating in classroom space, there has been a few projects in the past, building a computer lab or, obtaining, a software package for our students, that kind of thing. We've utilized these resources, but as a annual basis, we understand what it takes to run an equine facility, and so we were trying to help out partner institutions in achieving those goals, and making sure that those funds were accessible to them, because we don't have those same type of costs. Now we have other costs, obviously, and so on and so forth. But going forward, I think it does kind of make a difference as to whether it is considered a pool of money where you propose a project, or it's just a set amount, and then how this is going to be spent. I guess from my perspective, because if there were to be a capital project that we needed funds for in the future, is that something that at that point in time we can jump back in to offer a proposal for, or is that just, our portion is kind of cut out of the equation? And so I guess making decisions from our standpoint going forward, we kind of need to assess how it's going to be handled and what it actually says in the language.
I think that's all a really great point, and it is really interesting to bring this up. And maybe, so obviously this language that's highlighted is actually part of the statute, right? And so the question is, how do you interpret it? And that's really what we're talking about right now. Is it a matter of approving individual budgets after people get an allocation, or is it, again, a competitive process, like almost a bidding kind of process in a way, and the group evaluates proposals. You can't vote for yourself kind of situation. To
Could
move
I
forward.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Ryan, but I would just like to say that for the last few years, from our perspective, I think it's operated very well. I would personally not like to see it turn into a competitive process. I mean, the planning of the growth of our program and facilities long term lends itself very well to the model that it's currently distributed at. And so just as a voice of we like it the way it is, that's what I'd like to say.
No, good. That's what we're hoping to solicit. I mean, are there any other institutions here that would say the same thing, that they kind of lean towards keeping it a more competitive process? And like Leslie said, we don't have to change anything now, but it could be something we revisit because we will convene this group consistently at least 2 times a year to be able to talk about these things. So is there anybody else who wants to share kind of thoughts on competitive versus equal?
I think I'm with Brian there in that the university appreciates the equal spread and that we can somewhat plan and be able to make some long-term decisions on having some money to accumulate. And I know that some of it we can do some carry forward of funds. So if there is a larger capital project that we're looking at, if we can think about it, 2, 3, 4 years down the road and make some assumptions there, then we're able to use those funds in the best way that develops our program or helps keep our program running well.
Ryan, do you just want to hit on, because Dan mentioned carry forward of funds. There is a difference between us carrying forward funds and you carrying on over funds. So Ryan, do you just want to hit on that real quick?
Yeah, I'm trying to jump
Yeah.
down and remember where it's at.
It is allowed for you to carry over funds. And actually, that if you have a big project like that, you could write a proposal to us to say we are carrying forward over funds for X, Y, and Z. And as Ron mentioned earlier, the danger with us carrying forward funds is our funds are subject to be swept. I mean, university funds are too, but ours stick out a little bit more if we have revenue in account that is not being used.
So
And it's not like these are large accounts that we're holding anyway. These are, in the grand scheme of things, these are very small accounts.
yeah, no, I do think though. So Leslie mentioned this, and I know Leslie mentioned this, and the other Leslie is a great example of someone who has done this. UK, you guys are using this for a really big project, right? You guys are leveraging this to get a donor match to build a new facility. Great use of funds, right? But that's more feasible, right? When you get larger infusions or if you save over a number of years, right? Well, that takes a lot longer to get there. So there definitely are pros and cons, but the predictability and the planning aspect, as Dan mentioned, is a major advantage as well for the institutions. So there's definitely pros and cons to each one. But regardless of even if we do the equal kind of allotment, when you are planning to do something and hold those funds back, we technically do need to have an idea of what are you holding them back for, right? Is there a project down the line, like Leslie's disclosed and UK has disclosed with us with this property, this new facility that they want to build? That helps us know these are not just sitting there. They're not just reserved, because if a General Assembly member were to ask questions about how these funds are used, we would not want to report to them a restricted fund that had no designated use, right? Had no idea of what they're being used for. We want to be able to show, no, these are saved, but they're saved with a purpose, and this is the purpose that they want to use it for, right? So this facility or whatever. So I highlight this portion of the guidelines for that reason. There's also information in the contracts as well. But I know Leslie Brown, was this what you were kind of trying to get to? If you can.
Yes, my computer decided to freeze up, but yes, that is exactly what I was trying to get to.
Okay.
And one of the reasons we're doing this, anyone that has been around for a while has realized that our contracts have become very boilerplate. We just bring them out, blow the dust off every year, get signatures. On this next biennium coming up, we want to reevaluate the contracts to bring them up to date and to make them a little bit more reflective of the reality of today and the guidelines that you all decide upon.
I would also add, in light of Leslie Brown's comment about the the funds sitting in the account, and it may not be time to talk about this, but the addition of Bluegrass Community and Technical College and looking at where that's going toward maybe having to decide later of what that split would be. I still think that's okay because there's really doesn't appear to be a need to hold on to that 500,000 plus amount. As a matter of fact, there may be a need to spend down that 500,000 plus, and this would be a chance to do it and renegotiate in a couple of years or decide in a couple of years, as opposed to trying to maintain that level of funding that's just sitting there.
Yes.
Completely agree, Brian. Completely agree.
So Brian, you if that's just as us an administrative agent, obviously we take your all's advice on this, your recommendations, and hear everything. But like Leslie said, I think this is a really good thing to come back to, right? Like we need to keep on having this conversation. But the question is now the right time to change from what we already have planned contractually and go back to a different method, or kind of at this point just keep things how it is? And so we can jump down here to and I'll skip past this criteria for awards, and we'll get down to the actual allocation paragraph down here. So the base funding in this paragraph specifically is what talks about the $120,000 allocated equally to each eligible institution. The question is, do we want to change that now, or do we want to see, you guys have seen kind of the projected, if we forecast out kind of conservatively, what receipts look like, keep expenditures the same. If U of L wants to re-enter, not waive their contract, obviously that's a change that would have to take into account kind of right after. I would imagine that would have to be next biennium, right, Leslie Brown? Because contracts are already in place. Or
we do have on file that they have waived for the
okay
25-26 fiscal years.
Okay.
If they choose to go back on that in 25-26, we would have to come back to the committee and discuss.
Okay. So if we move forward, going forward, kind of status quo as things are, you've seen how the carry forwards will change. It may be the case that FY26 is a better time. So at the end of that, going into the next biennium, when we meet in that spring, would be the best time to have a, hey, there's been so much change. This might be a good time for us to talk about, like, how do we do this program all together, right? Our carry forward will be much lower at that point. We're going to have new institutions. U of L may end up, right, not wanting to waive their right. They may want to participate. That's all different change that may be good for us to know. Yeah, Amy, absolutely.
So just for my knowledge and planning ahead, is there a possibility then, if, we're waiving it for the 25-26 year, if there was a smaller project where, if we're still allocating 120,000, if we didn't need all 120,000, if we needed 15,000, would we be able to put in a smaller proposal for that, for a specific project going forward?
Yes.
I think that'd be up to the advisory committee.
Yeah,
right?
it'd be up to the committee. It would have to go before the committee, but
That's
yes, I mean,
like we
yeah.
could essentially propose something that's not just a standard all or nothing as a split of it.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have pretty significant flexibility in here, right? I mean, you guys know the language that we have, and if the receipts are too low, we can drop distributions, things like that. There's also language that if receipts are extra high, right, there could be an opportunity. And so, yeah, there's definitely opportunities. But again, everything that we would have to do in terms of allocating the resources themselves would have to be, I would reconvene this group. We'd come back together. We'd have a discussion, make sure everyone's good with it, look at the cash flow report, and then we could make that decision. And draw up a contract and so forth.
Ryan, if I could jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Again, we're the new guys on the block, so I don't think we're prepared to weigh in one way or the other as far as equal distribution versus putting in proposals. I will say, however, though, that as a community college equine program, we are kind of limited as to what we can or can't charge as far as tuition, but our horses cost us as much as everybody else's. And so $120,000, for the next 2 fiscal years could have a great impact on our program. And we do fill an important need in the state in that, there's a lot of kids who might be transferring over to one of the 4-year programs through us, and we also do a pretty good job at placing quite a few students in the frontline jobs, especially on the racing side now. And so I think that the money would be, greatly appreciated and well spent. We've already had a meeting with our top management at the college on what we might be able to use it for, if it was decided to do the equal distribution. So that's something that we would take appreciate very much and take seriously, and would help our program immensely. But if after 26 we decide to get together, as we said, to look at a different way of going about it, then we'd be fine with that as well. Again, I'm speaking for myself, but I just wanted to kind of point that out. And we've been around since 2006, so I think we play an important role, not just in our region, but in the state as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, all great points. Let's just, for the sake of time, I want to get your all's opinion on this as facilitator. If you guys don't want to do this, speak up. This really is the first and primary goal of this meeting, is to determine the distribution. And specifically for this biennium, are we going to maintain the 120 equal and just add BCTC into that, as we showed you? So $600,000 of expenditures, we'd see our carry forward go down a bit. I think it was around 120, Leslie Brown, that was left over at the end, again, using those kind of more conservative revenue estimates there as well. Is that something that everyone would be agreeable to, given that this is very much in the middle of a fiscal year and budgets have already been prepared, and we want to make sure everyone's plans are able to be executed? If that's the case, Leslie, we haven't done one of these meetings where we've taken a formal vote in quite a while. Take a vote, I guess, and go forward. Any thoughts on that beforehand? All right, no thoughts that I've heard. The other thing that I would be interested in saying is we do have this language here in the guidelines. And Amy, I want to make sure we're acknowledging what you're saying, because I do think that's a situation that any institution may potentially be in, right? Of having a smaller project that's super urgent, but maybe their $120,000 wasn't sufficient to cover, or maybe, again, situation like you guys where you guys waived. We do have this paragraph in here, so around our potential to change. So council advisory staff, along with the advisory committee, may recommend a fiscal year contract amendment if receipts are in excess of the initial fiscal year $600,000 allotment. So y'all could get more if there's more receipts. We could add in language here of, if there is a special need or a special request outside of the normal $120,000 distribution, council staff, along with the advisory committee, would come back and take that in terms of a proposal to be evaluated, and you all make a recommendation for moving forward on. Is there appetite for writing any language into this paragraph along those lines to kind of help? I know, Amy, this is kind of what you were talking about, hopefully to put in words that would be something that would be agreeable to. Again, if the advisory committee would like to.
So there's nothing in there currently that allows for that?
Nothing in our guidelines outside of, we have in the contracts where if revenues are not high enough, we can drop down. And
Right.
we have language in here that if they're in excess, we can go back. Now, this is a situation where not necessarily funds needing the existing year's receipts would necessarily have to be more. It could come out of a place like a carry forward or something like that we have in the funds. So that language is not in there. We do not have any guidance in terms of these guidelines for how we would proceed with something like that. So the question is, would you guys like to institute something like that?
I'm always a fan for keeping things simple, but I also know that it can be important to have some detail in there to work with. And it sounds like that would be something that would be relatively easy to add. And then on a case-by-case basis, people would submit and everybody would kind of gather.
Yeah.
I could support that.
And we would absolutely do our normal part of bringing in receipts, showing current cash flows, showing carry forward, and there would be no guarantee essentially that a project would or would not get funded, right? The whole idea is what you said, case by case, and I think that's Amy. That's what you're advocating kind of for U of L here, right?
Yeah, I mean, not only from our position of, if we waive the 120, but then requested a smaller amount, but I could also see a situation where, God forbid, there's a natural disaster and maybe there's a need
Exactly.
for excess in a certain situation, that I think this is exactly what this money should be there for. And so, if somebody came back and needed to request extra funding, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I think so. You just nailed something that's really great. There may be something that adversely impacts a single one of your all's institutions and programs that would require intervention, right? And again, we try to maintain some carry forward for those purposes to give some flexibility. So, thoughts? Anything else? Anyone opposed to the idea of putting in some language permitting this?
This is Dixie. Along with what Remy said, I think that this is great to kind of keep things simplistic, and what Shay said, trying to keep things simple, but the flexibility of that option, I think, is excellent because it helps to address Amy's concerns, but also, like everybody's saying, any kind of outstanding issues that might occur, we have that flexibility written in. So I'm in favor for this.
Okay. So I'll put in here, I'm trying to figure out the best way. Should I make Leslie Brown, our procedures really well. Would you recommend me go ahead and make some draft language here, or the other option would be me to send out some draft language to you all, get your all's thumbs up via email, or I can just take a stab at it right now, kind of
I mean,
live.
I think we probably need to go ahead and either take a stab at it now, or if you send it out on a draft email and put it in there, the next time the advisory committee meets, then discuss it openly.
Nah, let's just get it done now then.
Okay.
If everyone else is good. So we'll say this. Council staff, along with the advisory committee, may evaluate proposals for specific capital purposes at the institutions in excess of the initial $120,000 distribution in the fiscal year. Additional funding. All right. Let me highlight this. Y'all, we're doing this very live, so give me your feedback as I write down all this. Trying to practice my grammar here. So council staff, along with the advisory committee, may evaluate proposals for additional funding for specific capital purposes at the institutions in excess of the initial $120,000 distribution in each fiscal year. And amend, so I just put in here, Leslie Brown, we would have to amend the contracts at that point, correct? The same way we'd have to do if we increased.
Yes, but I mean that's model procurement code, but
Okay, relevant contracts.
so whether it's in the guidelines or not, that's going to be part of our state procedures.
Okay, so I'm hoping this gets right. Council staff, along with advisory committee, may evaluate proposals for additional funding for specific capital purposes at the institutions in excess of their initial $120,000 distribution each fiscal year, and amend the relevant contracts to accommodate the additional funding.
I don't think we have to have the word exact, just so we voted on adding
one
it.
quick question. Now, if those funds, $120,000 funds, are already spent, do we address that at all from the other institutions? Or when you say amend the relevant contracts, let's just say those funds have already been spent, or part of them have already been spent. Sure.
So I think all he's saying there is just a point of, we've already given you $120,000. If you've asked for an additional $15,000, we amend the contract to give you $135,000.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
That's exactly right. Does anybody see any problems potentially with this language? Is it
Would rather than excess, would apart from their initial 120,000 distribution be better
that's
phrasing?
a good point.
What about in addition to?
Is that better language, Dan? In addition to,
No,
is that
oh.
Either way, I mean, it makes it sound like for the case of U of L, where they're putting in, they've waived the 120, and if
Oh, yeah.
they ask
Yeah.
for a 15, then if it's not in excess, they, technically, and I mean, I'm not trying to be.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in addition to either. So yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point. So then maybe we have to put something in here around distinct, like a request for funding, like separate. Yeah, so separate from their initial 120,000. So apart from, I think, works. I'm gonna say the initial equal. I want to be abundantly clear, equal 20,000 distributions.
And also, just to let you know that any language that we come up here, we still have to take it through our internal process for revising this language. But as long as we get the ideas on paper, that'll be easy. And then when this advisory committee meets again, we'll have final language that has gone through our approval process.
But this seems like it's a really great idea.
But yeah, that's a good idea.
This gives us additional flexibility, helps out institutions like U of L who may need smaller amounts and don't want to take up 120, right? That's a really, really good idea. So
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go for it.
With this language being located at the spot that it is, this to me kind of reads a little bit that if we have receipts in excess of 600,000, then we have the ability to ask for additional funding. So should we place this language at another location so that it doesn't kind of correlate with that excess of 600,000 allotment?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we just do what I just did and just separate it out as its own kind of paragraph, would that be sufficient? Kind of break it?
And maybe the paragraph prior, just so that it doesn't have any correlation with the 600,000 excess.
Yeah, so let's see if the flow here. Cost estimates, yeah. All right. Yeah, no, I think this is actually that's a great recommendation. I think it actually falls more naturally right here anyways, before it. And in terms of this language, council reserves the right to adjust allocation should actual receipts fall short. And that's where this initial 120,000 allocated equally to each eligible institutions referred to. So kind of tease it up a little bit better. Thoughts on that, Dixie?
Yeah, that looks great.
Yeah. Any other input here? I think this is a great addition, but any other thoughts? And then we'll get back to the primary task at hand that we still have not voted on in terms of the equal distributions of $120,000. All right. If I hear no objections, we will move forward with keeping this language in the guidelines. All right, Brian's all about it. Let's go. And we'll move on to the next one. So I'll take a little bit more of a formal, more formal vote with this regard. So you guys see the language around the $120,000 allocated equally to each eligible institution that you guys will submit budgets for. And then you see as well the $600,000 allotment down here as well, initially noted. With U of L having waived for FY 25-26 those initial $120,000, it would still be $600K with Remy and the BCTC team included here. So as a vote, everyone for maintaining the $120,000 equal distributions, which would result in BCTC also receiving $120,000 in fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026 as part of this current biennium. Say aye.
Aye.
Or a thumbs up. I love it.
Aye.
Aye.
I love it. Awesome. Okay. And then anybody opposed? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, I saw a hand go up. Is that someone opposed? No, Ken's like, no. Okay. All right. So if no one's opposed, we will maintain the 120,000 equal distribution for FY 25-26, which will result in $120,000 for BCTC for this biennium. Again, this will be something that we can revisit as we go into the next biennium. We can have further conversations. It will likely be something that we will absolutely have to, given the trajectory of receipts for this program. And so we will have to make potential changes there as well, unless receipts decide to rebound in a dramatic way. All right. Thank you guys for your help with that. I think it was a really great discussion, and we got some changes in there that we didn't really foresee. So thank you, Amy, for bringing that great flexibility. I think it's a real big value add here. As we kind of resume, we'll keep going with some more minor issues. You see the addition of the word substantive here. This was a CP staff recommendation, and this is primarily because we've noticed that your all's initial budget requests come in, and there may be plans that change in the middle of it. We wanted to make sure that as you guys are processing this, because we look at your budgets and we look at the financial reports for this program that you guys give to us, and just want to make sure that there's consistency between those two. So if there's changes in how you all are planning on using these funds after your initial kind of budget was submitted, just let us know. We do have substantive on there because if you're changing, hey, we're going to put $25,000 of this money towards this piece of equipment. Now we're no longer going to do that at all. Out of 120,000, that's pretty substantive. But if it's like $1,000 difference, kind of in price or whatever may be, that's a relatively minor change because we do know your all's budgets are just that, they're estimates. And so we want to have this language if there's any substantive budget revisions to make sure those things are brought to us. Is there any qualms with adding this specific language to make it clear? Okay, no qualms, love it. And we'll keep going down here. So since I've taken over this program, and as Leslie's mentioned, we've kind of gone through and looked through budgets in a little bit more detail. We realized we didn't have any real clarity on how to evaluate like what is really a key component of the language in the statute around this of capital construction, renovation, expansion, and equipment. Capital purposes are the goal of this fund to result in eventually. So this is initially in the language, significantly improve, right, academic facilities. How do we determine what significantly improve means? And that's something that is important because, again, like the statute says, no operating purposes. These funds cannot be used for operating purposes. So things that are routine maintenance and operation, things that are going to be done to keep something in kind of its ordinarily efficient operating condition versus putting it in a better condition, extending a useful life, those sorts of things, improving efficiency, whatever it may be, are very different. And so we realized we're having to ask these questions when we look at budgets and financial reports and things like that you guys are supplying to us and asking for clarification, but we don't really have a definition around what does it actually mean to be significant, right? And so what you see here, you guys may be aware on your campuses, all of your campuses have received a large pool of asset preservation funds, which are used for renovation or renewal of your campuses, not just limited to any specific program, but for all E&G kind of assets on your campuses. We have a set of guidelines internally that CPE staff uses for evaluating projects. They are limited to capital purposes and they are not for operating. So routine maintenance operations, those sorts of things would not be covered. Kind of consumable inventory in that regard would not be covered in the costs either. And so it was recommended to us that, hey, you have guidelines for how you determine capital projects. Eligibility there might be good to use some similar language in this as well. So what you see here is essentially in these sub bullets the criteria that we use for managing some of our other capital related programs at the council, and specifically bringing in some additional language around facilities. What does that mean? Buildings, what does that mean? Campus infrastructure, what does that mean? And then the specific qualities around capital related projects versus routine, more operating budgets, things that are typically going to be funding from the operating budget of the institution and not a capital budget. So we can go through these in detail. Let us know if there's any questions here. There are problems with this additional language. Is there something that needs to be changed?
So, Ryan, one comment that I had when I first read through it, and it talked about campus infrastructure. I think it would be helpful if you, because we are equine programs, and with the exception of U of L, we all have facilities that they're UK facilities, so maybe you consider that campus, but they're usually not located necessarily on campus. So I think it would be helpful to maybe, have farm or university owned facilities, something like that.
Yeah. What if we just said like program related infrastructure? I mean, would that be like equine program infrastructure?
Yeah, that would.
Is that you're in favor of that? Is everyone else? What do you guys think? Because that's a really good clarification.
Agreed.
So, agreed. Okay.
Yeah.
So what if we put in this equine program infrastructure?
I think that's a good inclusion, although I will note that we tend to include the farms as campus, quote unquote. So when the students are on the farms, they actually kind of call that campus sometimes.
Okay.
But I think clarifying it would not be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I do think putting in here as well, equine program, everything in here has to be related to your equine program, right? So if there's some sort of upgrade at like, I don't know, central heating plant or something like that, that somehow connects out to a facility that you guys work with, that's not going to be eligible because it's going to be for all this other part of campus, right? That's not really distinctly for you guys, right? In your programs. And that's the point, is we want to isolate the impacts and the benefits to make sure it's equine related. So,
and I think that's a good idea, Ryan, because for example, here at Morehead State, our farm has the equine program, and then we also have our vet tech program where we have our kennels for our dogs and our cats and stuff. So,
yep.
This money could only be specifically as far as infrastructure goes for that equine building itself. So,
and we do want to be clear here. So like these are such as statements for facilities. So both of these, in terms of kind of seeing that we're looking at these two areas, these are such as statements because they're just examples, right? We don't want to hem you guys in by any means, but we give them an idea. So we actually reference pretty heavily. So National Association of College and University Business Officers has some definitions around what capital improvements are versus routine maintenance operations expenses. So we reference their materials. We've looked at APA, so Association of Physical Plan Administrators, and we've also looked at IRS guidelines around financial reporting of these things, so tangible property regulations and things like that. This list actually came from the IRS specifically. So we're trying to use external resources. We do this not just for everything, but to kind of get these ideas of kind of objective standards of what a capital project really pertains to. So this seems pretty straightforward. It gets a little bit more nitty-gritty. If there's no more problems with this top section, we can move down to the qualities.
One quick question, if I could, Ryan. As far as equine program related facilities, I suspect that it's got to be owned by the university or college. If you have a long-term agreement with another facility, and your partnership basically with them, would that, and you have stalls at that facility that you utilize and all that, would that also come under this, or is that not applicable?
That's a good question. So I think we actually talked about this previously, and you had some really good references for it. And Leslie Brown and I we're pretty agreeable to it, knowing that long-term leases like that, in many cases, they may lease it to you for like $1, right? And then you come in and fit up the whole thing yourself. We do know that's pretty standard, right? Within a lot of different programs. And so I don't know, Leslie Brown, that is, that in anywhere there's any sort of distinction that it has to be a
Yeah.
facility owned by the university.
Yeah, that was actually on our to-do list. We don't, on face value, we do not see an issue, but we have not researched it enough to be able to give you an official answer on that. But we are looking into it.
So at this point, then,
That's my
Remy,
stock answer.
yeah. So at this point, though, Remy, is the language here would not prohibit that, but it also doesn't explicitly like allow it either, right?
Gotcha.
And so I think that allows us the flexibility to go back and talk about that in more detail. Because again, I saw Leslie Oliver, you were nodding your head. Other institutions as well were kind of saying, yeah, like leases are a thing for us. And so is that something that would be of interest for everybody to have clarification on around ownership and leasing of facilities?
I think it's good to know we aren't in that situation, but we certainly know that it's out there.
Okay.
And I have one other quick formatting thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In your first bullet, so when you say significantly improve academic equine program facilities, then your first sub bullet, you just have facilities. But in the second one,
sorry.
you put in equine. So I just wanted you to be consistent.
Yep. Thank you. So I get for live editing of these things. So thank you for pointing that out. No, this is great. I'm glad that you guys are kind of on board with this. Yeah, we've got flexibility in here. These are just to try to give us some sort of clarity moving forward. So if there's no other questions on this top portion, and again, Remy, we will absolutely do more information kind of digging in that regard, make sure there's nothing particularly from a state perspective that would prohibit us from moving forward with that. And then again, we can always come back and we can revise these as many times as you guys see fit, right?
One more really quick thing, Ryan, if I could. I want to introduce our Vice President of Finance and Operations, Lisa Bell, who's joined our call. She's here to help our Dixie and I on the contracting questions. I don't know if those are going to come up now or if we're going to work with you guys directly after this call on those specific arrangements.
Those will come up later. We just really needed to get this in place and make sure that you all could be at it. And then Claudette Tracy will be reaching out to you, and she's on the ball, so she'll probably do it Monday, or she may be listening in and do it before we can even get this call. But she'll reach out to you with draft contract, and then any changes you have in that contract, you let us know. Now, our contracts, when it comes to equine, they're pretty generic, and they reference the guidelines because really it all hinges on that budget proposal that Ryan spoke about earlier.
I just wanted to say that in case, I know Lisa really loves horses, but in case she's got other meetings to be at, and if we could, but Lisa, you're welcome to stay. But I just wanted to be sure that we didn't keep
Yeah, we'll be reaching out to her after this meeting to discuss the individual contract with BCTC.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. And we do also appreciate all you all working with us on this. So I will jump off and thank you, Remy, for that, and look forward to working with Claudette on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Well, thank you for that, Remy. And we'll move kind of forward into this. So qualities of projects that significantly improve academic facilities. Need to put this equine. How do I say it up here? Equine, academic equine program facilities. Or equine program infrastructure. Include projects that extend the useful life or of the key building system. And this is where, when you heard me mention earlier, we have referenced a lot of external documentation to try to give us an idea, because this is not the only capital related program we're working on where we try to put some sort of guidelines, some sort of benchmark, so you guys can understand what costs are typically going to be considered. Your old institutions probably have capitalization thresholds and things like that, and their own internal policies for how budgeting works. This is what we're trying to get at here, is how can we try to create some sort of uniform guidance so it doesn't seem like we're just inconsistent with how we're approving or looking at budgets and saying, yeah, that meets the statute's requirement, that doesn't, in terms of being capital related and not operating. And again, referencing these outside sources, one of the major things that came up was extending the useful life of the building or key building system, as opposed to projects anticipated to be completed over the expected useful life of the building or key building system, i.e., or for example, routine maintenance. So the idea of this was you're putting oil in your car, right? Versus I'm changing the entire transmission, right? Completely different impacts in terms of one is expected within the 20-year, 25, whatever the expected useful life of the asset is, versus one is such a substantial change and replacement of a major part that the useful life of that asset's now extended significantly onto it. And so it's a true improvement in that regard. These are the questions that we ask, and it gets super gray. And so if you guys ever have conversations navigating this, it would be something we absolutely have these conversations with you guys for. And we do this with our other capital related programs as well. So that's the first bullet. That was informed from some NACUBO guidance that we looked in. This is a statement that we actually explicitly include in our asset preservation pool guidelines that we thought would be really good to have in here as well. So M&O costs that are typically funded through an institution's operating budget are not eligible. Again, that's to keep inconsistent with the capital purposes of this. And then another really clean interpretation, this came from the IRS guidelines, is there's a distinction between putting something in a better operating condition or just keeping it, right? So that car example is a really good example. Again, changing the oil keeps it, and it's how it should be conditioned, right? If I were to replace the engine with something that has more horsepower, it is now in a better condition than it was previously. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about. If I were to replace all of the major components on the asset, right, it's going to have its useful life completely reset. It's in a better condition than it's ever been. It's like new, right? That is kind of a question that we looked at. We've looked at some different IRS guidelines for that, even some CPA resources as well. And then for the last one here, pertaining to items of equipment, we said they must have to meet two requirements. So have a useful life in excess of 2 years. So the idea of it's not something that's being consumed very quickly. We looked at kind of some external standards for different governmental organizations, GFOA and standards like that. 2 years was a really pretty consistent number. Some even went as short as 1 year. And then have a cost of $5,000 or more, which that is to kind of resemble the most popular capitalization threshold. So your accounting and finance folks probably know what that term kind of, again, when you're putting something on your balance sheet, because it's going to have that useful life, it's going to be depreciated over time. That's to capture that as well. So thoughts, questions, suggestions, anything that you see with kind of this qualities criteria. Again, hoping to just give some guidance, some clarity.
I think it makes sense. And I see some of it coming out of what the conversations that we had last year trying to figure out some of our stuff. So
excellent.
It makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? We always want to make sure that every party here has the same information, same understanding, same expectations as much as we can. And that's what these guidelines are for. It's not because we want to like say you can't do that. It's just because we want to know if you're allowed to, because we want to all have the same standards, right, that we're applying, so we can make sure every institution's equally treated.
Plus, selfishly, when we receive the proposals this year, we receive financial updates. I don't think anyone wants to know the hours Ryan and I spent debating back and forth. Well, what do you think this means on the capital standards of that? Every time we got one, it was like a new debate.
It was always super interesting, but you guys have a lot of equipment and stuff that you need, right? So saddles, things like that, right? Those are expensive. And so we want to make sure that we're clear that things like that, they're going to last you for a while. We want to make sure that those are included.
Well, one that came up when you and I were having the conversation was the difference between buckets and like corner feeders that put the grain and the hay and help clean the stall and the horse eats it better. And so that made that very clear in my head when we had that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the one thing that we really didn't kind of address here that I know some of our institutions have had issues with is like computers, laptops, things like that. Man, that's a gray area. It's extremely hard to get into some of those assets and determine whether they're routine or not. So while these standards aren't necessarily supposed to address every gray area, they will not address every gray area. They're just better than what we have and provide some more clarity in terms of kind of what's eligible, what's not. Any other comments, concerns, questions opposed, or if anyone's in favor? I love silence. That means I'm hoping that you guys agree. So I love it. Thank you, Brian. Thumbs up all the time. I love the visual confirmation. We'll keep moving forward then. We want to make sure everything recognized. So this is language that was in there previously. Recognize the needs of all institutions, not include salary or other operating expense, or replace other funds for capital purposes. That's all standard. We did remove this line because it was redundant. It was mentioned previous times above, so we got rid of that. And then I think that might be the last major point. Let me double check my comments down here. We've already voted on the distribution. And I think that's it. So I guess if I want to take one last kind of vote in its entirety for these guidelines, if you're in support of the guidelines as we've reviewed today, the changes that are contained in it, please say aye or indicate via thumbs up, something else like that.
Aye.
Love it. Dan, did I get something from you? There we go. Awesome. Sweet. Very good. Awesome. And if there's anyone opposed, speak now. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was it's a long meeting. I know it's not often that we get a new program added to the eligible participants, but honestly, we're really happy to have you here, Remy, and the rest of the BCTC team. You guys are a vital part of the equine industry in Kentucky. And I know Leslie and I always find it really interesting looking at what you guys spend this money on and the really cool stuff you buy with it. A lot of times we have to Google and figure out what it is in the first place. Sometimes like horse exerciser machines and wave machines that are going through them, stuff like that. It's really cool to be able to see. So we hope that you guys are really benefiting from these dollars. I will send out a copy of this, kind of unmarked up, a finalized copy to the entire group. If you have any other questions about the receipts or anything like that for Leslie or I, or if you have kind of questions and want to process what it looks like next year as we kind of get through this current biennium, what this program will look like, feel free to reach out to us at any time. The last thing we had on our agenda today was just other business. And so if there's anything else that anyone wants to address colleagues-wise, any questions or anything for the good of the group.
Now we'll need to send these guidelines through official legal review, but I don't foresee any issues with that.
Anything else for the good of the group?
I just, again, thank everybody for including us into the group, and we appreciate it. And we've known a lot of you for many years, but it's good to see some new faces. So we thank you. Dixie and I both appreciate it.
And thank you guys as well for your input today. I remember when I first started at CPE, you guys weren't a very quiet group. When Sean McKinnon was still running this, you guys have known each other for a long time. We're really talkative. And so I know those groups are the best to work with. You guys are a fun group. You're incredibly good at what you do. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. We'll be in correspondence, obviously, with you, BCTC. You'll be hearing from us in terms of the contract, and we'll make sure that that process gets moved forward. So, and then Amy as well, in terms of, your all's, the new language that we've added in here and given that additional flexibility. Again, feel free to reach out to us if we need to convene this group in the future or for any of your institutions, let us know and we'll bring everyone back together for whatever the need is. So, all right. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for, again, your input, and have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. I hope you have Monday off. Well, MLK Day. Enjoy your long weekend.
Thanks a lot, Ron. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you all.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, Heather, do I need to do anything? Heather?